All right. Welcome, everyone, to the November 2020 meeting of the Glendale Planning Historic Preservation Commission. I can see from the screen that we have full attendance. Bob, I think you need to be on mute. You're rustling around is a distraction. All right. Well, let's begin as we always do with the minutes, approval of minutes from previous meetings. One thing as a ground rule, what will help us keep the record clean is if when we do vote, we'll take a roll call vote, and that way Becky will be able to record everybody's vote cleanly and distinctly. We do have two sets of minutes to approve this evening. The first is the minutes of August the 31st. By way of summary, we have everything approved and reviewed from those minutes, except that we didn't know at that point whether Leslie had voted or how she had voted on the Betsy Jones application. She has since clarified that her vote was a yes. So with that modification, I'll ask for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion is second. If everybody could signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Okay, no opposed, so I don't think we need a roll call for something like this. Everybody was in approval. The second set of minutes we had were from October the 5th. Again, we've all had a chance to review those minutes. What is the pleasure of the commission?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in
Mr.
favor? Oh,
I'm sorry, I have a discussion.
sure, that's fine.
I apologize, but because of my technical problems last meeting, I didn't get to submit my voting. Can I do that now, or how
You're
is
voting.
that?
You're voting for which one now, Leslie?
The 885 Forest Avenue and the 785 Congress.
Let's see. Okay, the minutes don't reflect whether anybody voted or how anybody voted. Did you vote in favor of those?
I did.
Okay.
After reviewing the minutes, I did.
Okay. Okay, well, let's Becky, if you can make that revision to reflect that Leslie voted in favor of those two. I appreciate it. All right. Any further discussion on these minutes? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion
Aye.
carries. Thank you, everyone. You can go back on mute for a while. I'll do some of the talking at least. Let's move on to old business. In fact, we only have old business today. Just for point of clarification, before we go too much further, I will exercise the privilege of the chair, and I will be placing the Bethany School application to the end of our docket. We do have the Christchurch windows. There's an item that didn't appear on the printed agenda, and that includes discussion of which one, all the steps on West Fountain. So we'll hit those two first. We'll move on to the continuation of the discussion on the Airbnb, and then we'll move on to Bethany. It's only 4 items, but I suspect there'll be a lot of discussion on at least 2 of them. So I ask that everybody be very concise with their time and with their comments. And in fact, with certainly with the Airbnb, we will probably put a time limit on the discussion, and we may even do that with the Bethany as well. So let's move right now into the Christchurch. David, could you let in Mr. Cook?
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Cook, we see that you've joined. We've had an opportunity to review the supplemental materials that you provided. If you could give us a concise statement of what changes occurred between last month's application and this month's, and we'll continue the discussion from there.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Last month, I submitted the application to replace the casement windows in the addition. All of the double hung windows are being restored, but the casement windows are beyond repair. And I'm here this evening to confirm that the proposed Anderson casement windows do indeed satisfy the commission's requirements And I would like to request that the commission approve this selection.
Okay. Were there drawings? Did you submit drawings to that in that respect, Mr. Cook, or some other materials?
Yes, there were some specifications, but I was unable to answer the question or stipulation that was added to the motion about the size of the glass. And it was, the glass was within the specifications that were specified by the commission.
All right, members of the commission, do you have further questions or comments for Mr. Cook?
Move we approve as the revised submission.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
All right. Any further discussion, members of the commission? David, there's nobody registered. There's no one else registered to speak to this application, are there? Is there?
Nope, no other registrants.
Okay. Well, let's take a vote. And again, if there's any opposing votes, we'll take a roll call. But for now, is all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. If you wouldn't mind staying in contact with David and Wally regarding what's the next steps for your permit.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
All right, well, let's move on, as I said, to a reconsideration of the steps at, what was the address, David?
It was 40
30.
West Fountain, 30 or
30.
30. I'm sorry.
Okay, this was actually a deferral from 2 months ago from our August meeting.
It was.
Yeah. Is there someone on behalf of this application available?
Unfortunately, I don't see him in the participants stack here, so I do not think he is in the meeting this evening.
Is he aware of the meeting? Do you know, David?
Yes, he received the same email that everyone who is an attendee did receive today.
All right. Well, let's pass on that request until the very end. Well, until we hear from him. I don't want to put him off too long, but if we have to, we'll put him off to the very end. Which lead us into our discussion, continuation of the public hearing, I should say, of the requested zone change or zoning text amendment for the Airbnb. David, if you wouldn't mind letting the applicant in and the attorney. Actually, we were going to begin, weren't we, David, with the continuation of the people who had registered from last month but weren't able to get in for technical reasons?
Yes, we have one individual, Mr. Eugene Butler, who I'm going to promote to allow to talk. He is calling in, but he is the only remaining member of the public to provide comment.
All right. And David, as before, if you wouldn't mind keeping time, we gave everybody a 3-minute window. If you wouldn't mind, you were very gentle about reminding people when their time expired. While we're waiting for Mr. Butler, one thing I do want to state for the record is that there seems to be some confusion of how this item came to be, how it came to be in front of us as a planning commission. I want to make the record very clear that this was an application made by the Canes and by their attorney. They were the ones that requested this particular text amendment that might allow Airbnbs in the B zoning district. This is not something that the planning commission instituted. It's not something that council instituted. Nobody at the village instituted or instigated this process. It was all by private effort. By statute and by our own zoning ordinance, we're obligated to review that request and to pass our recommendation on to the village council. So hopefully the end result of our meeting tonight will be a vote and a recommendation to council, and they'll take it from there. Is Mr. Butler, is that you on the phone? If it is, we can't hear you. Still on mute.
Mr. Butler, there might be a button on your phone you'll have to push.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Please tell us your position. And as before, I don't know if you heard this, but we're asking that you keep it to 3 minutes or less.
Okay, I'll try and do that. On August 25th, 1958, my family moved across the street from Quinn Chapel AME Church, a National Historic Landmark, and the property in question. I grew up across the street from Quinn and have resided on East Willow for over 60 years. I attended Sunday school and church at Quinn for many years and was baptized under the pastorship of Reverend Roy Daniels. Quinn was very instrumental in my spiritual development. My mother has lived across the street from Quinn, the original Quinn Chapel, for 62 years, 2 months, and 8 days. Currently, and for several years, I've been caretaking my mother at her home, and on a daily basis, medical personnel, doctors, nurses, aides, caregivers come to the house to examine, assist, and attend to her. East Willow is a very small and narrow street, which is why it was converted to a one-way. Parking is extremely limited, and allowing business operations would only make things more congested and completely change the quiet and peaceful character of the neighborhood, something that the residents have grown to appreciate, respect, and love. Along with the business operations will come the negative elements of trash on the streets, property intrusion, transit individuals who feel no commitment, obligation, or responsibility to the neighborhood. Our neighborhood is not suited for business, nor is business suited for our neighborhood. I should remind the planning committee and council that 50 years or so ago, there was a construction business in the backside of my mother's property on Cleveland Avenue. Clyde and Margaret Cooper, along with other residents of the neighborhood, petitioned to have this business removed because it was unsuitable to be located in the residential area.
You have about a minute.
They successfully were able to accomplish that. I asked the planning committee and council to use their common sense and insight and function in the best interest of the residents by disallowing this variance, requesting the rezoning of 313 East Willow Avenue, permitting short-term rentals as a conditional use, which would negatively affect the entire neighborhood. Please protect our residential area from opportunists that choose to invade, disturb, disrupt the tranquility that has existed for so many years. Our neighborhood is one you grow up in, you raise your children, and you grow old gracefully. Please retain our residential zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. I appreciate that. David, that should conclude persons who were registered before and who didn't get an opportunity to speak. So
That's correct.
The plan from there was then to turn the podium back over to the applicant, either directly or through their attorney. Let them have an opportunity to rebut what was said in opposition last month and today. And then from there, we would close the public hearing entirely and begin our deliberations. So David, if you wouldn't mind promoting Mr. Kane and Mr. Nye, there they are. If you would unmute both of you, and I'll let you decide how to take it from there. And once again, Mr. Nye, Mr. Kane, if you could please be precise and concise in your comments. We've heard a lot, but now is your opportunity to rebut was said after your previous presentation. So, gentlemen.
Thank you. This is Jeff Nye. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. There was a lot said. I'm not obviously going to be able to respond to everything. I'm going to try to hit the high points as quickly as I can. I hope you'll give us a little leeway on time if we need it. I won't need a ton of time. There were, maybe 4 or 5 different themes that we heard. And one of them was the safety of the neighborhood. Obviously, safety is something that everyone's concerned about, including Jake, including the Canes. All the evidence, though, is that short-term rentals are not a significant safety risk. At any given time, there's something like 800 short-term rentals available in Hamilton County, and there have been for quite some time. That's tens of thousands of rental nights per year. I know some of the speakers last time mentioned a particular incident in Cincinnati where a handyman was injured trying to break up a party. Obviously, that's not acceptable, but what I would stress is that's the only incident that I'm aware of in Southwest Ohio involving a short-term rental. For any one incident like that, there are thousands of nights with no problem. And statistically, you're much more likely to have an issue with a non-rental property. And when those issues do come up, they're typically associated with professional landlords. I'm sorry, my dog has just come into the room and she's being very loud. So can you get her? Just ignore them, please. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Working from home has its challenges. As you all know, I apologize. I'm sorry, I was talking about safety. Incidents like that are vanishingly rare. There are some of them. They are almost always associated with professional landlords where they have hundreds of these properties. They tend to grab the headlines, but they're very rare. That's not what the Canes are doing. This is a second home for them. They do not have any other investment properties. The Canes are local. They're not living on site, but they're not far away. They're not absentees. The Airbnb platform in particular, I don't think we were able to get into this last time either, gives you a lot of control over who you rent to. These are not automatic bookings, and you can restrict your rental to people with a certain experience level or rating, and only after they get in direct contact with the Canes. These are not, instant confirms. And they've installed security cameras, security doorbells, and so on. They're as concerned about safety as anyone. One of the other concerns we heard is that we don't want a business next door. This is not a retail operation. This is not a construction business. This is not even a full-time rental. This is, in this particular instance, I know this gets a little bit into the specifics of the conditional use application if we were to apply for it, but what the Canes are trying to do here is be able to afford to have a place where their friends and family can come stay. It's just a way to make that financially viable for them. This is not a money-making operation for them. And if you got an application for a full-time rental with 300 nights a year or whatever it is, you would deny that application. It's just a red herring. One of the other questions we heard was why the B district? And we heard some people say, we wouldn't oppose this if it were in all the districts broadly. Well, the answer to that is we're not wedded to the B district other than the Quinn Chapel is in the B district. We talked about this with the village council members and staff and so on for some time before we submitted the proposal. And we got a pretty clear indication, an informal one, but a pretty clear one, that what they were looking for was a narrow proposal. And that's why we proposed the B district. We could have proposed them in all the districts. We could have asked to redraw the lines to bring it within a smaller district. We were trying to target the proposal. There's no other reason than that. One of the questions we heard, one of the concerns we heard again, including today, was parking. This is a one-bedroom property. People renting one-bedroom houses, especially when they're coming in from out of town, have one car. And there's a driveway here. When you go to long-term rentals or permanent habitations, that's when you get to multiple cars, even for one bedrooms. This is really going to take parking off the street for all intents and purposes. But also that's a question for the merits of the application. One of the specific items that's in the zoning code for addressing conditional uses and whether they're appropriate is what the effect of the parking is in the neighborhood. That doesn't really have anything to do with the proposal more generally. I think, and so this obviously was a church. A church is certainly going to have more of a parking issue than a single family home does. And the truth of the matter is, in part because it's now in a residential neighborhood, it's not suitable for use as a church anymore. I know that we've heard a lot of the history about it. I know Jake has tried to respect the history. I think he's purchased a historical plaque to put on the front of the building to recognize some of that history. But the simple fact of the matter is it really cannot be used as a church anymore. And just a year ago, it was being used essentially as a storage locker. We're trying to get it back to a productive part of the community where people can come and stay. The last point I want to make, I think, and of course, we're happy to answer any questions you have, but the last point I want to make is sort of a big picture one about what the Planning Commission does. And the purpose of a planning commission and the purpose of a village plan is to ensure that the zoning code and the land use codes serve the needs of the community. And the fact of the matter is that at this point, as we heard from some of the people who submitted written comments on the proposal, is that there is no way to come and stay in Glendale when you want to visit your parents, when you want to visit your siblings, when you want to come back to where you grew up. The zoning code, as the village interprets it, does not address this need. And so, nobody is proposing that Glendale reinvent itself as a rental community. We're just proposing that we make sure that the code has the tools to address that specific need. I think you'll get a limited number of conditional use permits. Some of them would be approved, some of them would be denied, and it would be a relatively small number, but it would fill that current gap in the zoning code. All we're asking for today is a mechanism to make that an option for people who want to come stay in the community. There were a lot of other comments from the last hearing and from the written materials. I think Jake and I are both happy to try to address any of those if you have any specific questions about them. But I think those are kind of the major points we wanted to hit in response. And so what we'd ask you to do is recommend to the council that you adopt this proposal just to permit people to submit conditional use applications for this purpose in the future.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nye. Mr. Kane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thanks, Tom. No, not for now. Jeff and I collaborated, and for the sake of time, I think he covered, without just restating some of the things that Jeff said. I think we're good with that.
All right. And Mr. Nye or Mr. Kane, did you have anybody else that you wanted to have speak on your behalf?
I know we got some emails from people in support. I know that the village staff circulated a compendium of comments that they had received that included some supportive emails from people we'd heard from. I will say that I think the first circulation of that was missing some comments, and I know at least one additional email was located. So I don't know if maybe those messages went to someone else on staff. So I guess I would ask the staff to consider looking again for those if they didn't find any more. I don't know, and Jake, you may know, I don't know that anyone else was necessarily anticipating appearing here tonight.
No, I'd not asked anyone. I didn't know that was a thing for tonight. So no, I don't have anyone else on this meeting that's planning to speak.
All right. Fair enough. Then, Mr. Nye, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, other than, of course, we're happy to answer whatever questions the commission might have.
All right. Well, let's do close the public hearing. Matter of fact, I'll ask for a motion to close the public hearing. After that, I would open the floor open for deliberations from the members of the commission. During that time of deliberations, I think it would be appropriate to ask anybody questions. In fact, I have a few questions for you, Mr. Nye and Mr. Kane. But before I do that, I do want to ask for a motion to close the public hearing so we can go into deliberations. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second. And a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right, very good. Well, let's do that. We're moving on to deliberations. This will be a discussion amongst ourselves with some give and take, perhaps by between the applicant and others who might be opposed. A couple of things, Mr. Nye, from your presentation just now, I had questions. Actually, the first question is more for Wally. Wally, isn't it true that in the village there currently is at least one, maybe two commercial districts that allow Airbnbs?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. There are two Airbnbs located in the business district in the village square. One is the Century House, one is the Glendale.
Okay, and that's a E district, I think, or D district, one of the other.
Yes, sir, the E business district.
Okay. All right. And the next question I had, Mr. Nye, was for you. You said at the top of your discussion that there's a lot of evidence that short-term rentals are not a safety risk. Have you submitted any documentary proof of that? I mean, I suppose there are studies out there that would support that claim, but I don't recall seeing that in this application.
The answer is that I did not, commission a study of that. There was an article, I think, just a couple of days ago in the New York Times discussing this. As a matter of fact, I know I had shared it with Jake. I didn't think to submit that. The data is hard to come by. Airbnb is a private company. There are some other platforms like this. VRBO is one of them. And so the data there isn't a database of this sort of data. There isn't a national regulator of this. Each individual state and local jurisdiction may keep track of it, but there isn't a lot of publicly available data. I think the best evidence from what we've seen, though, in reading those articles and in seeing how other municipalities are treating this, is that the problem tends to be from those people who are operating this as a for-profit business. They get an unmanageable number of properties, and they don't exercise any discretion over who leases them, and that's where you get problems. That's not the sort of clientele that the Quinn Chapel is trying to attract.
I'd like to interject on that if I could, Tom. Airbnb does release some of that data. The most recent that I could find was from 2019, where they put out publicly, and I'm quoting, and I, of course, could send you the link to this. On any given night, 2 million people stay in homes on the Airbnb platform in 100,000 cities all over the world. Their total data from the last full year reported, and again, this was from 2019, was that 99.95% of trips on Airbnb have no safety issues reported. And that includes a report by a host or a guest is the most recent data that's available on that. And I would just say anecdotally, just from things locally that we're all familiar with. I was looking just a couple of hours ago at listings in places like Indian Hill, Hyde Park, Wyoming, Westchester, Mason, Blue Ash, just all places that, we all know, I think a lot of us probably grew up here, have lived here for a long time, are great communities, great residential communities that don't have big crime problems, that have, that community feel like Glendale does, that have sort of, in some way or form, that it's working there. I've not heard of any safety issues locally in any place like that, and sort of a similar circumstance to what we're proposing. So those are just the two things I wanted to add to what Jeff said.
All right. Jake, thanks for offering to send that email, or that link, I should say, to that information. A little bit late now for our process. The public hearing is closed, and your opportunity to have presented that is passed. But I think you both know the process is that we make a recommendation to council. I'm not sure if council will have its own full hearing, but perhaps you'll have an opportunity there to address in greater detail the safety. That's all the questions I had. I'll open the floor up to other members of the commission to ask questions or to make statements. And then from there, we should move on to
I'd like to go next, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, Tom Kerr here. Basically, it boils down to allowing a new use in a residential zone. And I look back I go by the ordinances quite a bit, and I went back and looked at the historic district purpose and intent. And it states, in order to preserve and protect the historic character of existing and future historic districts and landmarks, both inside and outside the historic district. And when they wrote the ordinances, down in the additional use regulations, 154.51A7, they specifically wrote, they did prohibited uses, hotels, motels, tourist and trailer camps. The concept being, when they wrote that, they wanted to keep the residential districts residential. So they didn't want what we call transient people coming and going. They wanted people to have skin in the game who lived in the neighborhoods. So as I look at this, I want to remind the fellow council members or planning commission members, I've been on this thing for 20 years, and there have been other approaches to change the residential zoning to commercial for different usage. Back many years ago at 985 Laurel, at the southwest corner of Sharon and Laurel, the big house known as Glen Gables, the Cincinnati Boys Choir came and wanted to have the zoning have a use permit basically for commercial purposes so they could run their business there. And we rejected that. And that was in the C district, if I might mention, because at that time it was thought if we set a precedent for letting a commercial use in the residential neighborhood, we wouldn't have any reason or justification to deny anywhere in the village by commercial use in a residential neighborhood. And that was the first one I remember. And then there was one at 1215 Congress. That's at the northernmost corner of Congress and the border with Sharonville or Springdale, across from the cemetery. The owner came and wanted to have his home rezoned to commercial use so that he could get more money out of it and sell it, because he was across from the cemetery and he was next door to the commercial development there in Springdale. And we rejected that. That was in the B district as well. Same reasons, setting a precedent. And then at 1100 Congress, at the Northeast Congress corner of Congress and North Lake, the lady that owned that house came and asked to rezone it commercial again. So it was near the commercial district where the Meritage was and the gas station years ago was, and the eye doctor or the doctor's office is now. And she wanted to have it changed to commercial to increase the value when she sold it as a commercial property. And again, we rejected it because we don't change the zoning, and that was in the B district as well. And then in Glendale Avenue, if you recall, the Sawyer property, they had 5 acres and they wanted to have it rezoned for multi-family, higher density development from what it was zoned residential. And again, that was in the A district. And at the time, our ordinance said you needed 10 acre minimum, and they only had 5 acres, so we rejected that on those grounds. And then more recently, at 1081 Morse Avenue, you recall it, that's in the A district. We had a request for an Airbnb short-term rentals business use, which is exactly what we're dealing with here. And we rejected that as well. Many of the same reasons many of the residents brought up, keeping the residential districts residential, and the other concerns. But bottom line, what we're doing here is setting a precedent that if we do this, we're going to be subject to anybody anywhere in the residential districts in the village coming and wanting to change for some commercial use. So I just want to mention these as my rationale for why, when the time comes for a motion, I'll support a motion to reject the application on these grounds. And that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else? Beth? Go ahead,
Yes,
Beth.
I'd just like to clarify something. I believe that this is a short-term rental business. Otherwise, why would you need to use Airbnb? That's a question to the applicant.
Sure, yeah, happy to answer that. The reason that we put the place for rent on Airbnb was because of the controls that Jeff mentioned that are in place there. I know, I have friends and people that have hosted there, and of course we've used it a lot to stay in other houses and such when we go out of town and to stay in other residential communities. And so the ability to kind of the filtering system to see, rental history to where it's not just blindly like a hotel or motel where anybody can just say, hey, oh, your place is available, I'm going to stay there tonight. What this does is that someone can find it, and we could put up a calendar to say, like, on these dates, we're not going to be using it for personal use for, a friend or family staying there, whatever. They could contact you and say, hey, we're going to be in Glendale, on this week or whatever. Could we stay there? And then we could ask follow-up questions. We could see that person who would have to verify their identity, see people that have sort of vouched for them when they've used it in the past and said this person took really good care of our house, that sort of thing. And then only when we were satisfied with the answers for who's coming, why you're coming to Glendale, et cetera, we ultimately would have the final say to say yes or no, you can rent our house. And so that's why we put it on there specifically.
Okay, so it's not fully accurate to say that your only purpose for this property is to have a place for your friends and your family to stay. Correct?
Right, we would want to do both. And so the reason that we did that is because we want to have, as I say, a place for family and friends to stay when they come in town and to have as a second house. And so the thought was, of course, having a long-term tenant there wouldn't allow that use. And so we saw short-term rental, Airbnb in this case, as a way to kind of supplement when we're not going to be using it, rather than having it sit empty. Why not rent it out for a week at a time, a month at a time, et cetera, when there was somebody that was a good fit that we felt comfortable with, to offset our cost of owning it and also let us use it for personal use like we were wanting to do. So it just seemed like a really good fit for what we were trying to do.
Well, I'm not unsympathetic. I have used Airbnb when I have traveled as well. I was actually directly across the street from 1081 Morse Avenue, which was used as an Airbnb for a while. And that situation was quite different in my mind because the owner was on site at all times. And there was off-street parking. And so, somebody who owns and lives in a house as their primary residence can have family and friends come stay with them anytime. But if you're renting it out to the public on a short-term basis, that is a short-term rental business, and that isn't allowed in a residential district. I wanted also to respond to the conformance with our village plan. In a conditional use, we take into account 3 factors: conformance with the village plan, traffic impact, and impacts on the neighborhood. And there isn't anything too specific about housing opportunities, whether short-term, long-term, or anything. But under historic resources, our plan says to protect the public health, safety, prosperity, and welfare. Under transportation, it says minimize the impact of vehicular and rail traffic and ensure a safe, peaceful, and quiet village. So those two points call into question for me whether this proposal meets those items of those elements of the master plan. We have heard people raise the issue of East Willow being a very narrow street with limited parking. I think there's parking on only one side of the street because of that. And I think that's a legitimate concern. And then we have heard lots of testimony of dozens of residents who oppose this because they believe that it will have a negative impact on their quiet enjoyment of their neighborhood. So taking into account those 3 factors, I don't see how that we can approve this. And so I would move to deny the application.
Okay, Beth, I suppose your motion is based on all the points that you just made and the points really that Tom Kerr made also?
Yes.
Okay, 'cause the reason I'm asking is at some point we may have to memorialize the motion into a formal resolution to council. I just want to make sure I understand the reasoning. So any other comments before we ask for a second to the motion?
This is Jeff Nye. Could I jump back in just briefly to make one additional comment?
Sure.
With respect to using this as a business, it's certainly true that the Canes hope to use the Airbnb platform to offset some of their costs of ownership. They don't have any intention of operating this as a sort of a profit generation endeavor. But I think if that's the concern, either the commission or council could impose some specific limits on, say, the number of rental nights, whether it is a minimum of X nights at a time or a maximum of X nights at a time, or if it's no more than 100 days a year or whatever it is, something like that, may ameliorate those effects on the neighborhood. That could be written directly into the text of the proposal, or that could just be determined on a case-by-case basis on a conditional use application. But if that's the concern, I think there are other ways to address that without throwing, the whole proposal.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nye. Other members of the commission?
I have a couple of questions. How many parking spots are on the property?
There's one spot in the driveway.
Thank you. And when did you purchase this property?
It was late November of last year.
And when did you start your renovations?
We pulled all the permits and started, I'm going to say around the first of the year 2020. I don't know exactly.
Thank you. And when did you put this on Airbnb for the first time?
That would have been, it was after COVID started. I don't know exactly. It was in the spring. It was done around the 1st of April, and it would have been sometime relatively shortly after that.
Thank you. And then when did you apply for your residential rental property registration?
I don't know. I'm not sure what that is.
Well, I have a copy of it.
Okay.
And I'm questioning whether you actually signed this or you had somebody else sign it for you. But it was submitted on August 18th, 2020.
Okay.
So, and this is a requirement for all rental properties in Hamilton County. So it appeared you weren't aware of that at the time that you started this, this work. Is that correct?
That would be, yeah, that would be fair to say. We've never had a rental property before, so I was definitely learning on the job. I did, if this is what you're talking about, I did have to, at some point I realized on the auditor website that because I was wondering when my property taxes were going to be coming due. So I went there to check the address or the mailing address, and it was for the 313 East Willow. And so I contacted them about, changing that to like a different mailing address, that sort of thing. So that may have been when I filled that out at the same time. I'm not sure, but I had to do something to let them know that it was not a primary residence as far as the Hamilton County auditor. Is that the same type of thing? That's the only thing I recall doing something like that for.
That would, I believe that would be correct.
Okay. So that's probably what that was. I probably did all that at one time, and that was just kind of out of, whatever.
I asked the questions because this seems to be, Mr. Kane, that you started this process without actually doing your homework. And I have secondhand information, and so I won't never take secondhand information as something, but somebody there who lives there told me that somebody in the neighborhood approached you not too long after you started work on it. And at that time you said that you were planning on making an Airbnb, and that they actually told you that it wasn't allowed. So again, that's secondhand. It's not really worth taking it, but I think, unfortunately, because I've stayed in many Airbnb, you got ahead of yourself on this one. And because of the precedent that it would set, and Tom Kerr did a list of things that we have rejected, and there's several more that I'm aware of. We've never made these types of exceptions or changes because of the precedent it would set, and therefore I will vote against this.
Randy, is that the form of a second to Beth's motion?
Yes, sir.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I don't mean to rush this process too much, but I do know that Mr. Thomas is now with us to talk about stairs on West Fountain. And of course, we have the Bethany application, but I don't want to cut anybody off if there's other commission members who want to ask questions or express an opinion. Is that you, Dan?
Actually, I actually had a really quick question. You had mentioned earlier you would have considered this a second home. Does that imply a home for investment purposes for a rental, for a long-term rental? Or why is it specifically considered a second home for you?
Sure. Maybe there's a better term. When I say that, what I mean is that a place where we could have, my wife and I both grew up in this area. We have big families in this area, friends that live out of town, that sort of thing. So when I say second home, primarily is a place where we would, have for when family comes in town, friends come in town, et cetera, for them, a place that we own that they would be able to stay at because it would be available, if that makes sense. We've stayed there ourselves, with our kids and stuff, that sort of thing, just kind of on the off night after it was renovated. But obviously it wouldn't be our primary residence. So I don't know if there's a better term to describe that, but that's what's meant by that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else on the commission wish to comment, question? Leslie?
I have a quick question. From my understanding, the church is currently being rented out. How long is the term of that lease?
It's a 1-year lease.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, anyone else? All right, seeing none, we do have a motion and a second. The motion essentially is to recommend that this zoning text amendment not be approved. The recommendation would be sent to council. I don't think it's on council's agenda tonight. I could be wrong. But in any event, the reasons were expressed in the motion in the second. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Very good. Motion carries. Mr. Nye, Mr. Kane, if you wouldn't mind working with Wally Cordes and David Lumsden, they'll guide you through the next stage of this process.
Thank you. We appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. All right. David, you texted me separately that Mr. Thomas is on the line. Could you promote him so we could talk about his stairs on West Fountain?
Absolutely.
Mr. Thomas, thank
Yes,
you for joining us.
Thank you.
You didn't hear the top of this discussion, but we're a bit under the gun. We have a hard stop at 7 o'clock, and we have another application that's probably could easily take another hour. So we reviewed your steps obviously once 2 months ago. We've seen your supplemental materials. If you could just give us a brief summary of what's new, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I had Andy Cosgrove do the step drawings for me that I know David kindly took from me in my email. And we're, ready to proceed. The drawings I thought from Andy were great, although I'm not knowledgeable in that area at all. But to match, obviously very much to match our current home. Yeah, and I'm just eager to proceed as long as they reach your satisfaction.
I think the design is very attractive, and I would move approval.
Thank you.
All right. Is there a second to Beth's motion?
Yes, second.
All right. Any further discussion, members of the commission? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Very good. Motion carries. Mr. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind staying in touch with Wally and David Lumsden, and they'll guide you through the next part of the process.
Very well. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, members of the
All right.
committee.
Thank you. All right. Well, that brings us to the last application before us. And this is a hearing on an amendment to the Bethany School, their existing conditional use permit. Essentially, they are requesting an installation of a graded patio with sidewalks and landscaping on the side of the former raised building site. David or Wally, did you want to have any introductory comments, or did you want to just turn it over to the applicant?
David, if you will, or we can do the applicant, either way.
I'd say for the sake of time, we'll just head right on to the applicant. I'll promote both Christy Boron and David Gould from Bethany School.
While they're being promoted, just a brief overview of the procedures where we're headed. This is again an amendment to a previously approved conditional use. So in a real sense, it's like a brand new conditional use permit that begins with us by way of a recommendation that's forwarded to council. I don't know how many years ago it was, but the original approval for this part of their campus included I'll call it a plaza or a lawn, or I'll let them describe how it was approved initially. At some point, most recently, they revised the plan to replace that plaza with an administration building. Planning Commission recommended approval of that plan. It went to council where it was denied. So we're sort of back to square one, basically with some revisions to the original concepts within the conditional use. Again, though, we're here as a recommending body. Our recommendation, if it's tonight or next month, would ultimately go to council. So who's speaking? Christy, are you speaking for the applicant?
Yeah, I believe so. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. David, are you able to pull up? I don't even know if you need to pull it up. I think everybody should have the documents.
They did receive everything that you submitted in advance, but if you do want something displayed, I'm happy to pull it up for you.
Why don't you pull up that document that shows the original rendered site plan on the same page as the new, and then I can just speak to that.
This one, I'll just have you just let me know when you want me to scroll down.
To scroll down, okay, that's fine. So what we're talking about right now is showing you a change in the area where the building that is called multi-purpose on this sits, as well as the round plaza. So the original master plan kept an existing building in that location. That's what's called multi-purpose. That is what was originally the Hope Library. So you can see with the original master plan, that building staying in place. You can see the sidewalks being designed around that building, as well as that round plaza that got tucked up in the northwest corner of the property. Since this original approved master plan, that multi-purpose building has since been torn down. And so all we're doing at this point now is because that building was torn down, we are now showing how we will grade that area out. And so, yeah, thanks, David. So you can see that since that building is torn down, all we are doing is that the grade naturally drops there. So you can see that all we're doing is terracing the grade in that area. That round plaza that was tucked up in the northwest corner, we were able to pull in a little bit, actually further away from our neighbors. So what was a round plaza is now kind of a triangular plaza area right there, almost identical in size as what the round one was. But since that building ended up going away, we were able to pull that plaza inward within the site a little bit more. You also, you have the whole set of, I believe, construction drawings that show the grading. I also, yep, go to that one, go to the blue one. So in my mind, really the only big question I would think that you would be asking would have to do with impervious surface change. And so what you see here shaded in blue is the original master plan impervious surface in that corner of the property, which added up to about 8,900 square feet. The revised site reduces that impervious surface significantly, reduces it by almost 4,000 square feet because of the elimination of that building. The storm detention system was built to account for that building staying in place. So the storm detention basin at this point is oversized from what is really needed because of the reduction of impervious surface. So I'm hoping that this doesn't take an hour. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. All we're asking for is to simply grade and get that whole portion of the site finally complete and no longer a construction site. So that's all I really had to present. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know you guys have a full set of construction documents. Our hope was that we would be able to go directly from this to Village Council tonight to be able to present to them.
I do have a question. What will this site be used for?
It's simply an outdoor learning classroom. And so the idea is that they'll be able to take a class out there, do a presentation on the stage if they want to do a presentation on the stage. But it's really an outdoor learning environment for them. That's not to say they might not have some sort of school community presentation there where you might sit on the lawn and listen to a speaker outside. But I believe that's about the extent of it. David's on the phone. So I don't know, David, if you've thought any further about the use of this.
No, Christy, you touched upon those two things. That's it.
Yeah, so basically the same exact, we had a plaza in the original master plan that was approved, the same exact size as this one. So the same use that we had proposed for that round plaza originally is the exact same use that we would anticipate here.
So will there be amplification used in that on that plaza?
No, we do have some power. I mean, we have some power outlets going there in case they did want to have someone to stand at a podium with a portable speaker. They could do that. Again, we had that same exact amenity in the original set of drawings as well at the round plaza that was tucked up in that corner.
Thanks, Bob. David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that the village engineer looked at the stormwater issues related to this change.
Yes, I'll tag Mr. Cordes in for this one.
That's a good question, Mr. Chairman. I did write to Mr. Tim Casto and forwarded him to the plans from Ms. Boron, both the design plans as well as the rendering overhead. He responded to me in an email on October 30th that, and I'll summarize it, the detention basin should receive less stormwater and thereby release less stormwater and helping the downstream water flow. He recognized and he agreed with Ms. Boron that is a substantially less impervious surface and more pervious surface than once before proposed.
Okay. Thank you, Wally and David. David, you told me by separate email that we have 6 people who have registered to speak.
We do.
And we have about a half an hour, a little bit less than a half an hour. Let's move on to those people and let's give them 2 minutes each so we can try to keep within that 30 minutes. And David, you wouldn't mind being the gatekeeper. That'll give us a bit of time. I hope to give us some time to deliberate afterwards. So whoever's first, David, you go.
All righty, give me 1 second. Let me check that list that I sent.
I have the list in front of me. It looks like Gordon Kuzinski is first on the list.
He's coming in now.
Gordon, you're on mute. Once you're off mute, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. I will do my best to get this to 2 minutes because I have 11 questions total. A couple of those have already been addressed, so I will pass over those as I go through my questions. So with respect, my first question was with respect to intended use. Mr. Cordes asked, and that question was answered. I do also notice that there are electrical outlets on the west wall of the K through 2 building, and I asked what was the intended use for those receptacles. I think that's been answered. Second question is enhanced landscaping is shown in the new plans on sheet C700. What's the projected height of the trees that are shown 5 and 10 years from now? Third question, will the defective landscaping that has already been installed as part of phase 1 be replaced at the same time? Many pieces have died and the balance is inconsistent with what was shown on the original application in 2016 and 17. Fourth question has partially been answered. Impact of
You
this.
have about a minute.
I'm not going to get there, David. Was with respect to the stormwater. The only comment I have beyond that is there's a blockage at the exit point, and how this stormwater will be managed during construction. Fifth point, C300 is at the top of the concrete sidewalk, sits at 682 feet. There's a 26-foot drop in elevation, and has that been taken into consideration in this redesign? Next question, what's the construction schedule for this revision? Next question, when will the balance of the work previously approved for phase 1 and 2, 2017 been completed? Specifically,
Your time's concluded.
Hey, David, I think that Gordon's probably speaking for some of the other neighbors. Let's give him just a little bit more time to finish the list. And on that point, Gordon, if you could finish another minute or two, I will ask that Christy, I hope she's taking notes and can address these one by one quickly at the end of his questions. So go ahead, Gordon, please finish, and we'll go from there.
all right. So construction schedule, balance of the work for phase 1 and 2, specifically traffic gates, landscaping, and administrative spaces referenced in the 2017 application. Point 8, what's the plan for St. Faith if it is decided not to be used for administrative space? 9, on sheet C200, there is new blacktop striping and curbs shown. Please discuss what work will be done in this area. How will the neighbors and village property damage issues discussed earlier in 2020 be addressed? 10, lights are indicated on sheet E2.01. How bright will these be? And will they be on motion sensors? And where are the existing lights located on campus that are referenced in the schedule? I walked and drove through campus. I can't find them. Last question, since school has reconvened this year, we've noticed an increase in the amount of morning traffic down hedgerows compared to last year pre-COVID, of course. Once phase 2 is completed, do you have an approximate estimate of the percentage of traffic that will be turning right and dropping students off at the new K-2 building, then exiting to the east for the original approved plan? I appreciate your time and continued diligence on this project. We as neighbors, as much as I'm sure Bethany and staff are looking forward to the dumpster and construction fences going away. We are too, but the above things need to be taken into consideration in everyone's review. Thank you.
Christy, if you wouldn't mind taking those, giving a summary answer of each. As Gordon pointed out, you already addressed some of those, but
You're assuming I sat and wrote down every question. Which
I don't assume I expected you to.
I did not sit and write down every question as Gordon was going, because you asked me about, you mentioned that like halfway through his list. I can, in general, I think, answer the majority of his questions. Some of them I do not know. I do not know how tall the trees are going to be in 5 years. You can look at the site plan. It gives you the species. The majority of larger trees going in this area are locust trees, which are fast growing, and they reach a maturity height of 30 to 40 feet. How tall they're going to be in 5 years, I don't know the answer to that question. This plan has significantly more landscaping in it and a lot more trees in it than what was originally approved. I can tell you that. The original master plan simply had shrubs circling that round plaza. They had tall evergreen shrubs. This plan now has a number of trees that will be getting to 30 to 40 feet. Gordon had a question with regards to the significant grade change from the top of the sidewalk down to the bottom. Yes, it has been fully designed. Yes, the grading has taken all of that into consideration. And the water flow directed to the storm detention basin has been fully designed. If there is landscaping that is currently dead from phase one, yes, the intent would be that would be replaced. That would still be, depending upon when it was planted, it would still potentially even be falling within the client's warranty period to get that replaced. So I will absolutely follow up with checking on any plants that have not survived from that initial phase. In terms of construction sequence, our plan was to get this wrapped up as soon as possible. We were hoping that we were going to, we were not expecting to have to, quite frankly, present again through the conditional use process. We were hoping that we were going to be actually wrapping this up right now and being able to get some of our paving done still this calendar year. I'm not sure that the paving will happen this calendar year because we're going to hit the period of year where it's too cold to pave. The rest of phase one and phase two construction work will all happen as soon as we get the go ahead. Everything, quite frankly, should be done by spring. We'll get the grading done. And if we have to do the final coat of paving in the spring after winter, because we don't have enough time to hit this calendar year, we'll do it as soon as we can in early spring. In terms of St. Faith, we don't know yet. It has not been determined what this school is going to do with that building. We're kind of still trying to get our arms around the results of the last village council hearing that no longer allowed us to build the new administration building where we wanted to build it. And so quite frankly, at this point, we're taking a pause. The sisters are a bit worn out at this point. So we're kind of taking a pause on the discernment process with regards to St. Faith. So I do not have an answer for how St. Faith is going to be used and if it's going to be saved down the road. So for now, that just stays as the master plan had always suggested. I think I have pretty much covered the majority of Gordon's questions.
Let's go on to the others who have signed on to speak.
Okay.
And I see Mr. Nippert's online and he's next on our list. So as before, Christy, if they have any questions, I may turn to you. But
Sure.
for now, let's turn to Mr. Nippert. And Mr. Nippert, if you heard, we're trying to keep our questions and comments to 2 minutes because we have a very hard stop at 7 o'clock. Please proceed.
Right. Well, I will do my best to do so. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, for the record, my name is Alfred Nippert. I live at 380 Albion Avenue. My concern is, of course, water that was raised in some of Gordon's. And when we had the stormwater issues that came up this past spring, and council reviewed it and said, okay, fine, we'll have a moratorium on any further activity. And the hope was that Bethany would start engaging the neighbors. To me, it is just raw arrogance that once again, without any conversation with the neighbors, they've made another proposal. With all due respect, Ms. Bowen, had you talked to the neighbors, you would have known that we had concerns about how fast these trees were going to grow, what the routing of automobiles would be, whether or not—
You have about a minute.
With the existing water runoff, which wasn't handling it before, or whether it would handle it now. I've not seen any structure work to work on the water impoundment throughout the entire period of time this summer. So I just think that there once again has been an ignoring of the neighbors, and I find that shocking. And I think if this does go to council, council should keep in mind what they did the last time, which was deny it until neighbors have been addressed and they fulfilled their promises under the original proposals, and not keep going forward trying to modify things. And with that, I pass. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Nippert. David, if you wouldn't mind promoting Steve Schneider.
See, Don, I can be brief.
I don't see Mr. Schneider in the list here.
All right. Well, Dan Love is next on the list. Is he ready to speak? There he is. Mr. or Dr. Love, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, and we'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, Christy, couple questions that Gordon brought up that you didn't get a chance to answer because we were firing them so fast. One is about the lighting. One of the things we have appreciated what you've done up on the project was putting the area lighting on motion sensors. That has helped a little bit, and certainly probably appreciated by the Mcswains. But my concern is if you look at that C300 page of the drop off, I think I don't remember now, 29 foot drop off into that same drain that's constantly plugged up and overflowing. I presented video back in May of the water just running off and over that drain is almost always covered over with debris, and it all ends up going down behind Gordon's and on down to Alt Lane. And why would it be any different now? It looks like you would bypass the detention basin, and like Mr. Nippert, we were waiting for a big presentation on how you would redesign the water detention system since it wasn't working. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Love. Christy, you want to address that quickly?
Sure, I can do that. At this point, we don't find that there is any design issue with the storm detention system. We have never been able to actually finish construction down in that corner. That's the purpose of this, is so that we can finally wrap up that end of the site. In terms of the traffic, there is zero change in traffic. The way that the traffic was presented in the original conditional use is exactly how it will continue, how we plan for it to continue to operate. So there's zero change in terms of that. The question in terms of the lighting in that area, the lighting that we're proposing in this area of the site is low bollard lights. There's nothing tall. There's nothing that is going to be shining on any neighbors. It's all simply to be able to light the walking path. So it's all low bollards that are simply making sure that people can actually see where they're walking on the sidewalks at night. It is able to be switched on and off so that it doesn't need to be on if there is no need for people to be on site in the evening. So in terms of the storm detention, there is no intent to do any redesign on the storm detention. We've had the village engineer look at it. Hamilton County has looked at it. Our civil engineer has looked at it. And it has been deemed engineered and installed appropriately. Again, we've never been able to actually finish this portion of the site. So it will help if we can finally actually wrap up the grading and get everything seeded and landscaped as it's supposed to be.
Thank you, Christy. Next on the list, David, is Sister Hope Mary.
I do not see her on the list.
Then the last is Ron Mcswain. Is he available? There he is. Mr. Mcswain, I think you've heard the first part of the discussion. We're giving people 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'll reserve the comments that can really be related to council when this goes to council, because Tom, you serve there, and also the mayor is there, because I do have some comments relating to future planning commission activities. But what I do want to present is something that you can, when you pass on to council, you can consider and should examine before you approve this. And that is to look at, I only have one comment regarding the site redesign plan, and that is to examine page 4 of the presentation. This is the landscape plan. And you'll see, even though trees have been mentioned, you'll see in writing that once again, an exaggeration of what is proposed versus what will actually happen. The drawing of the large mature tree in the lower left corner greatly exaggerates what will be planted. 2.5-inch caliper or diameter trees, which are planned in the presentation, no way look like the tree that is shown there. It will be years before they mature to the size of the drawing. Like previous landscape renderings, the end product does not in any way resemble what was originally presented for your approval. I'm requesting an upgrade to the size of the trees to be planted. This would reflect positively on the final appearance of the project. The proposed planting does not coincide with the magnitude of this building project or the adjoining neighborhood. I was going to make reference to future considerations of requests that come before you, and I do
About
think,
20 seconds.
okay, then I'll skip to the last one. In closing, I would like to mention just a few of the end results that have affected our family during this ordeal. To attempt to hide the mammoth 3rd to 8th grade building, whose 45-foot height, which was approved, actually reaches 60 feet when viewed from our home. We've spent over $25,000.
Your time's concluded.
I'd like an extension of about 30 seconds.
Finish your thought, Ron. We can go from there.
Okay. We spent over $25,000 in planting the tallest spruce trees we could find. It will be 10 years before that they successfully block the top 20 feet of the barn-like structure as viewed from the west end of the building. We've also moved our mailbox and address from Hedge Road to Oak Road for safety reasons. Oncoming traffic from Bethany often acts like we have no right to enter our driveway off of Hedge Road. Likewise, the continual flow of mud and water onto our drive makes checking the mail or using the drive during wet conditions totally unreasonable. There are more issues I could go into, but you've heard enough. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak as a fellow neighbor.
Thank you for your time, Ron. That I think is the end of the people who pre-registered to speak. We have just 10 more minutes to wrap up our discussion. And at that point, we have a number of options. One is to pass on a resolution recommending approval to the council. The opposite is also true. We can recommend denial, but we could also defer. I don't think we're under any time constraints from that perspective. But I'll leave it up to the commission. What's the pleasure of the commission? You have any questions, comments, motions?
Well, if nobody else wants to talk, I will. The plan that came, of course, it was disappointing. We approved the other building and it got rejected in council. But the plan that's presented tonight is basically grass, landscaping, impervious or pervious surface, which is should improve the concerns for drainage that we've been hearing for years. So when it comes time, I'll vote to approve this because I think it'll improve the site, not only for the drainage, but also to finally complete that corner and see what is going on down Hedge Row as far as storm drainage. So that's all, the only comment I have.
Thanks, Tom. Others on the commission?
Yeah, I do. If after this is all done, we still have drainage issues, do we have any recourse? Is there anything more that can be done?
Wally, perhaps you will want to address that. I know that the village is taking on a project that is directly related to the storm drainage up there. But
I can jump in a little bit, Mr. Chairman. While the engineers for the architect have designed a system that exceeds the capacity projected, as well as our engineers reviewed it and agreed with them that it was built to exceed capacity, we have been plagued with rather severe 100-year storms, and I believe at least a 500-year storm for that process. I agree with Ms. Boron that we have not finished the project to the point where everything's graded in. One of the biggest concerns is the groundwater that runs into the storm system now, and I believe that will completely be alleviated once everything's grassed in and buttoned up. If capacity continues to exceed, we will certainly have to revisit that. But meanwhile, we are applying for a significant grant to take the stormwater underground, receive it from Bethany, and the other 70% of the watershed, which is not Bethany, to get it underground and take it down Hedge Row as well as Albion and get it into the creek. We'll know more about that grant, I believe, in December. And we're very optimistic that that is something that has great potential to be approved. Two steps here. We need to finish up and evaluate it and to see where the grant is. And then the third step would be to determine how to move forward if those two steps don't improve the situation.
All right. Thank you, Wally. Any other member of the commission?
Quickly, I'm aligned with Tom Kerr and that we ought to get this thing finished. I'm concerned about both of Mr. Mcswain's comments. Is the pictures that we were originally shown in the original presentation and what is put along the fence line is drastically different. And two, it is just common courtesy to rather than make this council or the planning commission and then council the place where everything gets worked out, is for them to just get the group of people together ahead of time. And I am very disappointed in the way the Conjure has handled this. I can't tell you the number of times I've driven up there when it's rain and there's water pouring over because drains are filled. And they repeatedly, the neighbors say they've never been discussed. So I'm going to probably vote for this, but because I think we shut it down, get this thing done for them. But I think Conjure's been irresponsible.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else? Is there a motion of any sort?
I'll move to approve as submitted.
Okay, and that the motion would be in the form of a recommendation to council, right, Tom?
Right. Thank you.
All right. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, well, motion is second. Any further discussion, members of the commission? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. That will be forwarded to council. Wally, is that on the council agenda for this evening?
It is, sir. It is a verbal resolution pending your decision tonight.
All right. Well, that concludes the items of our that required any action. Is there any other business that needs to come before this commission? Mr. Lofty, Mayor Lofty, you have anything that you want to add?
Move we adjourn. I was finishing my notes.
on that motion, right? All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Have a good council meeting.